This video is brought to you by Nebula. Here in the UK, we've not been that great at building new infrastructure. Whether it's trains, houses or reservoirs, projects reliably end up being over budget and underwhelming. The latest victim of all this seems to be Britain's nuclear power stations. The UK has been trying to build a new generation of reactors, in particular Hinkley C and Sizewell C, to replace its old ones, but costs are already spiralling, putting the long-term viability of the projects under question. So in this video, we're going to have a look at the current state of nuclear power in the UK, the new reactors, and ultimately why Britain is struggling to upgrade its nuclear power systems. If you want more UK political drama from us, then check out our podcast Starmageddon, where we track the successes and failures of this new Labour government. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's start with a bit of context. Here in the UK, we might not be as nuclear focused as, say, France, but we still do rely on nuclear for a significant chunk of our power generation. Back in 2022, the UK generated about 15% of its electricity from nuclear power. But this number has actually been decreasing over time, with the UK generating roughly 25% of its energy from nuclear in the late 1990s. While some of this decline in nuclear inevitably results from the rise of renewables like solar and wind, a large part of this comes from the fact that nuclear generators are being decommissioned, and we're just not building them fast enough to maintain output. As things stand, there are a total of 9 nuclear generators dotted around the country, with 2 in Hartlepool, 4 in Heysham, 2 in Torness, and 1 in Sizewell. However, both Hartlepool reactors are currently scheduled to close in 2027, as are Heysham reactors 1A and 1B. Heysham reactors 2A and 2B, and Torness reactor 1 and Torness reactor 2 are scheduled to close in 2030. The last reactor scheduled for decommission is Sizewell B, but even that is expected to close in 2035, a mere decade away. Now, some of you watching this will think, great, that's fantastic, we should be moving to wind and solar power anyway, so let them close and we can move on. However, Labour apparently believe that the UK can't rely entirely on wind and solar. They're too variable. The country needs a more reliable form of electricity generation that can work as a backup when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. This could be gas, but obviously this wouldn't complement the government's stated ambition to achieve net zero by 2050, which is why Starmer's government have come out in favour of building more nuclear reactors, with them specifically referring to the need to build Hinkley C and Sizewell C in their manifesto last year. So now we know what the current state of nuclear is in the UK and why the government is keen to build more, let's move on and have a look specifically at Hinkley C, what went wrong with it, and whether the government is making the same mistakes with Sizewell C. Hinkley C is already in construction in Somerset, and is expected to operate for 70 years when it's complete, and should produce roughly 3.2 gigawatts, roughly half the current nuclear energy output. This means that Hinkley C alone is expected to account for about 7% of the total energy generation of the UK. As the energy sector is privatised, Hinkley C is a joint venture between Electricité de France, or EDF, who have a 66.5% stake in the project, and the China General Nuclear Power Corporation, or CGNPC, who have a 33.5% stake in the project. Despite the chief executive of EDF claiming in 2007 that Britons would be able to cook their Christmas turkeys using power generated from Hinkley C in 2017, the project didn't even begin construction until 2017. It was suggested that Hinkley would be completed by 2025 and cost only £18 billion. But the completion date was then pushed back to 2027 and has, in the last week, been pushed back again to 2029, with EDF claiming that there could even be a further delay to 2031. This is alongside an update from EDF last week that the project would now cost between £31 and £35 billion, based on 2015 prices, or about £46 billion in today's prices. This means that Hinkley C will be the most expensive nuclear power station ever built, and almost 4 times more expensive on a pound per megawatt basis than the average nuclear power plant in South Korea. Now, while EDF are shouldering the risk, and therefore these increased costs, the deal they got means that they will charge consumers more for energy when the plant opens. So, what went wrong? Well, part of the reason is that the UK just hasn't built nuclear power stations for ages. The last nuclear power station to be built in the UK was Sizewell B, and construction began on that in 1987, nearly 4 decades ago. This is one of the reasons that South Korea can build them so cheaply. They've built lots of them consistently over the years, and the cost has come down as manufacturing has become more efficient. While EDF have built power stations like Hinkley elsewhere in the world, they haven't had to contend with the UK's complex and confusing regulations before. The regulators have forced EDF to make 7,000 design modifications to the plant, which has resulted in a 25% increase in the amount of concrete needed to complete the plant, alongside a 35% increase in steel. Combined with delays associated with COVID, rising inflation increasing the cost of the materials as a result of delays, a worker shortage, Brexit complications, a lack of housing for an extra 3,000 workers that EDF realised were needed, and supply chain disruptions, this has all led to the project going massively over budget and being massively delayed. So, as Sizewell C is to be the next construction project, it's worth looking at whether the lessons have been learned. To an extent, it seems an effort has been made to reduce the extra cost and make this go more smoothly than Hinkley has. For starters, the design is meant to be similar to Hinkley, which should be easier to get through the regulators and should benefit from not having to learn the same lessons again. It's also being financed through a new Regulated Asset Base or RAB scheme, which means that electricity customers contribute to a loan to the developers via an extra surcharge on their energy bill. This lowers the cost for developers. Despite this, Sizewell seems to be having similar problems as Hinkley, with its overall expected cost doubling from £20 billion to £40 billion, making it the second most expensive nuclear power plant after Hinkley. If this were to happen, not only would it cast doubt on the overall viability of the project, but it would also raise questions about the British state's inability to learn from its previous experiences, which is how other countries like France and South Korea have been able to bring the costs down over time. Like a lot of things, this whole situation is very much in a state of flux. With us entering a new year and Trump re-entering the White House, well, the world has felt more stable, hasn't it? Every day we're faced with weird headlines, from Trump's attempts to take over Canada and Elon's wild ride in Europe, or even Trump trying to swap New Jersey for a shiny Charizard on the playground. Okay, that last one might not be real, but we do dive into the chaotic world of US politics in our series WTF USA. That's our series where we explain everything that's happened across the pond in the land of the free. Because while the election might be over, with Trump in the Oval Office, the number of WTF moments only looks likely to increase. Unlike some of our other more serious videos, the tone of WTF USA is more light-hearted, and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. If you're interested, WTF can be found exclusively on Nebula. Now, if you didn't know, Nebula is an independent, creator-owned streaming platform that specialises in thoughtful content. Over there, you can find creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, and Legal Eagle, with many of them releasing their very own original series on the platform. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support, we'll be able to make other interesting, weird, and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click our link in the description to get 40% off. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.